Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and today's battle's going to be a bit of a horror show, which is kind of appropriate because it is October, the month of Halloween, and not only that, it's also Friday the 13th. And that's doubly appropriate given that today's sponsor is once again Curiosity Stream, especially given the nature of the documentary that I'm recommending today. This is The Beasts of Halloween. Although this is actually not so much a supernatural as a nature documentary, focusing on the kind of animals that have historically been associated with the supernatural. Things like black cats, things like spiders, things like toads, things like wolves and bats. The series explores the animals concerned and how they manage to get their link to the supernatural. And if that doesn't ring your bell, well, it's Curiosity Stream. I mean, they have thousands of documentary shows and movies, with new content dropping every week, exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. It's all extremely affordable, with plans starting as low as less than $5 a month. So if you like the idea of being able to access any of this content on either TV, mobile device or PC, then click the link in the video description, scan the QR code that's appearing on screen right now, or just go to curiositystream.com/mightyjingles. And if you use the code MIGHTYJINGLES at checkout, you'll also get a further 25% off what is already an absolute bargain. So, how about that horror show for today, Friday the 13th of October? This is Sir Breadboard. He's in the very strong Soviet Tier 10 battleship, the Kremlin. He's in a mostly Tier 10 match. Domination mode here on the Faroe Islands map. I say mostly Tier 10. There are 3 members of each team that are not Tier 10, which is bad news for the Lepanto and the Prinz Ruprecht on Sir Breadboard's team, because they're both Tier 9. Similar situation on the enemy team for the Minnesota and the Brest. But I mean, these are fairly good Tier 9s, with the possible exception of the Minnesota. Both teams also have a Tier 11, of course, although only one. Both destroyers. Sir Breadboard's team have a Dalana, the enemy team have a Yamagiri. Let's talk about the ship that Sir Breadboard is sailing, the Kremlin. So, Soviet Tier 10 battleship. It has numerous strengths, but it also has some fairly significant weaknesses. Although I remember when this thing first came out, many people, myself included, kind of overlooked those weaknesses and just complained about all of the strengths. It has the most hit points of any... Well, actually, I don't know if it still does have the most hit points of any ship in the game. I know on release it definitely did, but that was a while ago, and it's probably been overtaken by then because, you know, power creep. But anyway, it's got a lot of health. And that health is protected by a metric ass ton of armour. In common with other Russian battleships, she has an extremely short cooldown on the damage control. But also, in common with other Russian battleships, she has a limited number of charges. Her anti-aircraft defences, even after several nerfs, are considered to be on par with some high-tier light cruisers. But just like with some high-tier light cruisers, you can see it makes absolutely no fucking difference whatsoever when you come under air attack. Oh, we'll talk about those nerfs in a moment, by the way, because they're hilarious. Anyway, talking about the strengths of the ship. Oh yeah, the guns. 18-inch guns, 457mm guns, which means these armour-piercing shells can completely overmatch up to and including 30mm of armour plating. She also gets very, very good torpedo damage reduction, something like 46%. And by battleship standards at least, pretty good concealment. Now, all of this was considered a bit too much when the ship was first introduced. People were saying the ship's too tough, it's got too much health, it's too well armoured, it takes almost no damage from torpedoes, the guns are too good. So Wargaming said, well, okay, yeah, we hear you, and we agree that the Kremlin may be overperforming just a little bit. So we're going to nerf its anti-aircraft guns. Yes, really. We're going to nerf its medium-range anti-aircraft bubble. Only Wargaming could come up with a way of responding to calls to nerfs for a battleship by instead buffing aircraft carriers. Oh, don't ever change Wargaming. We love you just the way you are. The ship does have weaknesses though, although they're not that pronounced. People would point to the, compared to other Tier 10 battleships, relatively short range of the main battery 18-inch guns, but they can still hit targets at more than 20 kilometers away. Well, they can in theory, because this is a definite weakness of the ship. They're horrendously inaccurate at long range, but they get more and more accurate the closer you are to the target. Don't most ships get more accurate the closer you are to the target? Well, yeah, but the Kremlin gets even more accurate at medium and close range. The guns also have, and we're not talking, you know, Vermont standards of slow reload here, but the guns do also have a fairly slow reload of 33 seconds. So if you're trying to play this thing as a sniper, kind of like this, you're doing it wrong, because you have to wait forever in order to be able to miss the target at long range with most of your shots. Although any shots that do hit are going to do a fair amount of damage. This thing does have a devastating weight of fire. I mean, in theory, with armor piercing loaded, if all 9 shots hit and all 9 shots do citadels, which realistically is never going to happen, but in theory, this ship can do more than 130,000 damage at once. Oh, here comes the carrier again. Oh, and he scored a citadel on the Thunderer. Now, these AA guns, and the secondaries as well for that matter, which by the way are terrible, but while the AA guns are respectable, and if you spec for it, although why anybody would want to waste their captain skill points on AA skills in this game is a different matter entirely, but even if you do, the AA guns and the secondaries are so horribly vulnerable to high explosive fire that within the couple of minutes of the start of the game, you're basically going to have no AA or secondaries left. Oh, and there's a perfect example of the medium range accuracy of the Kremlin. 6 shots fired, 5 hits. Meanwhile, the team are getting absolutely hammered. They're down to 50 points. They were 4 kills down before they got their first kill, and managed to crawl back up to just under 100 points, leaving them only 300 points short of the enemy team with none of the cap circles. Meanwhile, Sir Breadboard, determined to finish off this Thunderer, rewarded with more citadels, and realistically, if he's going to stand any chance whatsoever of taking this cap circle, he's going to have to kill the Thunderer, and his little friend over there too. Because while he is contesting this cap circle, he's never going to take it. He's too big a target, he's too obvious, and he's too easy to hit, so he's constantly getting reset. But it's in circumstances like this where the Kremlin is kind of in its element. Brawling. Is that Thunderer going to keep showing him broadside to shoot at? It's like he didn't learn his lesson. Oh, well, he got away with that one. But yes, brawling. Theoretically, what the Kremlin is best at. And it is pretty good at it, but even here it has some limitations. Although, again, I mean, these are technically weaknesses, but they're not that bad. Let's talk about the bow plating. He's making the most of it here. He's nose in against both the Thunderer and the Minnesota, both of whom are on with 18-inch guns, but not 18.1-inch guns like the Yamato and the Musashi, or even higher, which can overmatch battleship 32mm bow plating and potentially citadel you from the front. Now, the Kremlin does have a 60mm belt which extends all the way up to the bow, but it only covers the lower half of the bow. It's not like the Grosser Kurfürst, which has a fully 60mm armoured bow and is immune to overmatch. This thing can still be overmatched from the front by 18.1-inch or higher guns. That does not, however, mean that it can be citadeled from the front, because also in the bow of the ship is a hidden 100mm deck. So, yeah. Is that Thunderer thinking of going for a ram, by the way? Because that wouldn't be a terrible idea. I mean, he's low on health, he's vulnerable. He's probably not going to win this fight, and taking somebody down with him would be a great idea, especially since Sir Breadboard's team have just lost the Lepanto and are now down to 65 points. What's he doing? What's he doing? No Thunderer? Seriously? Oh well, never mind. You know, if that Thunderer just kept charging in and gone for the ram, I mean, it wouldn't have won him the game, but I think it would have probably reduced Sir Breadboard's team down to about 5 points for the loss of a battleship. Well, anyway, you know, could have, should have, would have, didn't. Thunderer's down. It wasn't actually Sir Breadboard's kill, but he's up to 92,000 damage. The Forrest Sherman has now been spotted. Surprisingly, all of those shots missed. I mean, this ship does enjoy increased accuracy the closer and closer you get to the target, above and beyond what you would normally expect from just being closer to the target. And he is now actually able to... Wow. I don't know what the Forest Sherman had to do there that was better than preventing this cap from being flipped, but whatever it was, it didn't prevent this cap from being flipped. I mean, you could say the same thing about the Minnesota too. There's a hit on the Forest Sherman. The team have just lost their Mecklenburg, of course, but they've scored enough kills in the meantime that doesn't 0 point them and lose them the match. And there's the kill on the Forest Sherman, bringing the team up to 181 points. And they do now, of course, have a cap circle. And the difference in the kills isn't that big anymore. Now, the Minnesota here is in all kinds of trouble. I mean, the Minnesota is... I'm not going to say it's a bad ship, because I've seen people doing extremely well in this thing. But it is a very, very slow ship. And when you're cornered in a situation like this, you really have no choice but to go for it, because you're not running away from anything. Also, if the Minnesota's thinking about going for the ram, well, he's not difficult to avoid because he's so slow, unlike the Thunderer, which probably, if he'd put his mind to it, could have succeeded in ramming. The team have just lost their Prinz Ruprecht. Sir Breadboard, you're taking an awful chance here, exposing broadside to the Minnesota like that. Well, he's not though, is he? Because the Minnesota, like the Vermont, has a horrifically slow reload. And his gun's not even pointing this way, he's shooting at the Napoli over there, allowing Sir Breadboard to angle away from the Minnesota and also dodge most of those torpedoes. And just wait for his guns to reload. Notice the extremely good firing angles on the turrets here, by the way. The Minnesota's going for the Napoli. It's the smart thing to do. He was probably hoping to take out Sir Breadboard with the ram and then gun down the Napoli, and he's at least succeeded in gunning down the Napoli, but that has made him horribly, oof, yeah, vulnerable to some broadside shots. But once Sir Breadboard was aware of the risk of getting rammed, there was absolutely no way the Minnesota was going to be able to pull it off. I mean, the Minnesota's so slow, it couldn't even ram an island if you give the island a minute's notice. I mean, the Minnesota's played this about as well as he could be expected to under the circumstances. I mean, maybe he could have angled up a little bit more and not taken such a colossal amount of damage from the last salvo and still gunned down the Napoli, but under the circumstances, very, very slow ship. Outgunned, outnumbered, never going to be able to run away. Did about the best he could possibly be expected to do and did at least take the Napoli down with him. Meanwhile, Sir Breadboard's team still getting hammered. Sir Breadboard still under air attack. Although I don't think he's taken much high explosive damage. I think it's all mostly been armor piercing, so most of his AA guns and secondaries are still intact. Although the secondaries on the ship are terrible, by the way. Well, people say that the secondaries on the Kremlin are terrible, and they're certainly not good. I mean, this isn't a Grosser Kurfürst, this isn't an Ohio. But just not having the best secondaries in the game doesn't mean your secondaries are bad. What makes the secondaries on this thing bad is just how fragile they are and how easily they're killed by high explosive spam. But you were never going to rely on your secondaries to defend you against the destroyer in this game anyway, which puts you in the same position as just about every other battleship in the game that isn't, for example, a Grosser Kurfürst or an Ohio. And unlike the Italian and French battleships, at least the secondaries on this thing are a decent caliber and can, if they actually manage to hit a destroyer, do some actual damage other than maybe setting a fire. But it doesn't have many of them, and they do have a slow reload and limited range and only a 5% chance of setting a... Yeah, okay, the secondaries aren't terrible. I think that Brest made a critical error. Yep, there it is. It's up to 182,000 damage. There's only 3 of them left, though, against 5 enemies, and the enemy do still have that cap circle advantage, and here comes that carrier again. Oh, and they've just lost their own carrier. Fortunately, he does at least have 46% torpedo damage reduction, otherwise the carrier would have probably finished him off by now. Some shots out there at the enemy Kremlin, who has gone undetected. Oh, wait, he's back up. Oof, Citadels. More would have been nice. He's not dead yet. There's the return fire, but he's angled up against his return fire, and the enemy Kremlin is not, although he's starting to angle now. Again, the long-range accuracy, pretty bad. He was lucky to get the Citadel. Ooh, ooh, enemy carrier spotted. So both Sir Breadboard and the friendly Shimakaze up ahead have got a tough choice now who they're going to go for. Because the Kremlin, I mean, they need kills, but the carrier is a big threat, particularly for the Shimakaze. Oh yeah, baby. Let's have some more of those. The thing is, the Kremlin's on lower health, but the carrier is easier to kill. And killing the carrier, as long as they've got the chance, is probably the smart move. Because the fact that they still have a mostly full health Shimakaze is probably the team's ace in the hole at the moment. And air spotting from the carrier is the biggest threat to that Shimakaze, so... Well, he's also able to angle up against the Kremlin while keeping all of his guns firing. And missing. At the Malta. The Malta at this stage of the game is suffering from attrition, by the way. I mean, that was not a full torpedo squadron. Ooh, lovely. More of those, please. What's the Shimakaze up to? Oh, there's the high caliber award. Ah, the Malta's ducking in behind an island. He is actually capable of thinking and breathing at the same time. That means that the Shimakaze is not going to be able to take him out with a torpedo attack. Speaking of torpedo attacks, enemy destroyer spotted. I mean, I make a big deal about the 46% torpedo damage reduction that the Kremlin has, and it's certainly very, very good, but... Ooh, Shimakaze's going for the Kremlin. And is missing. Then again, he only needs to hit with one torpedo, because even though both of these ships have 46% torpedo damage reduction, if a Shimakaze torpedo hits you, you're still taking more than 10,000 damage. Nice, the Shimmer's got him. Where did all the Shimmer's health go? Oh, he's been spotted by the Malta. And he's just used all his torpedoes against the Kremlin. He's trying to take the Malta out in a gunfight. Huh. I mean, the Shimakaze's guns aren't actually that bad. The Kremlins are better. Carrier destroyed. It's now 3-on-3. Although the enemy team do have two of the cap circles, and somebody, that pesky Yamagiri, is attempting to flip the one cap that the team, well I say the team, Sir Breadboard here, and the Napoli who was with him, have flipped. It's being countered by the Sevastopol though, because there is another ship alive on the team. The Sevastopol down there in cap circle, Charlie. Unfortunately, surprisingly, for a tier 10 Soviet cruiser, the Sevastopol does not get radar. It might have hydroacoustic search though, as long as he was smart enough to pick it and not defensive AA fire instead. But, ooh, Yamato giving broadside. Really? Two completely different kinds of battleship here, by the way. The Kremlin is definitely a brawler and not a sniper. The Yamato is definitely a sniper and not a brawler. And the Yamato, well, this is just what happens if you're in a Yamato with most of your health intact and you get into a close range brawl with a Kremlin. Oh, shit. The Sevastopol's in trouble. Might not be able to save him. The Yamato, of course, you can't even angle in a Yamato in a close range brawl because that just exposes the cheek armor underneath the forward turrets to shots that will citadel you. Is this Yamato aware of that? The Sevastopol's gone down. The enemy team are back up to 973 points. He's going for the citadel shot. He gets the citadel shot. There's the Confederate and the Kraken Unleashed. 5 kills. Confederate, high caliber. He's basically spanked the entire enemy team here, but all he's really doing is resetting the clock slightly and buying a little more time to try to hunt down the remaining enemy ships and sink them before the enemy team reach 1,000 points. At this stage, there's basically no way they can win this unless the enemy team do something stupid like trying to win harder, because they're at 972 points. The Austin is on the far side of the island over there. It's the Yamagiri who was spotting him for the Austin. Realistically, unless one of these enemy ships, because I mean you could argue that they're trying to win harder, but are they? The Yamagiri didn't really take any great risk popping out there and spotting him for the Austin. Managed to get both his torpedoes and a couple of shots out, but the enemy team are going to reach 1,000 points and win before those torpedoes hit. The Yamagiri, look at this cheeky bugger, coming out to farm a bit more damage after they've already won the game. I did say today was going to be a bit of a horror show. Sir Breadboard in the Kremlin. Confederate hit at least 6 enemy ships and do at least 20% of their health and damage. He did more than that. Dreadnought received damage amounting to at least 120% of your own health, and he has the largest health pool in the game. Kraken Unleashed for 5 kills, high caliber. 5 kills and 350,000 damage done. with more base experience on a defeat than all but the highest scoring member of the enemy team got for winning. Sir Breadboard in the Kremlin, who unfortunately had the great misfortune to be featured on Friday the 13th, so this was never going to be pretty. Seriously, you need to go lie down and rest your back, because after that performance, I mean, some teams are just incapable of being carried. Still, hell of a performance, extremely well done, commiserations on the result. And everybody else, I hope you're all having a great day. So Breadboard wasn't. Well, he was, but it just wasn't good enough, was it? If you can't take a joke, you shouldn't be playing World of Warships. That's it for today, folks. Hope you all have a great day, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.